Host and fellow agitator Adam Keller. It is Saturday, August 28th, 2021, and we are broadcasting live online on WVNN in the Decatur, Athens, Huntsville, Decatur, Athens listening area from Huntsville, Alabama, in the Spice Radio studios. A recording of this program will play tomorrow, Sunday, August 29th, 2021, on the great WGOL in Russelville, Alabama, and Wednesday, September the 6th, 2021, on 102.3 WHIV in New Orleans, Louisiana. Today we have wiped the table clear. We've set everything else aside, and we are going to be building on last month's Unions 101 episode with Connor Lewis. So we are very excited about that. He is joining us from Pennsylvania this morning, and we're going to be taking your calls. This is the Alabama AFL-CIO Open Line Saturday. The phone number is 1-866-494-9866. So while we are building on last month's Unions 101, this is going to be a Unions 102, so to speak. If you have any questions, feel free to call in or leave us a chat in the YouTube, and we'll try to get it answered for you. We'll try to get that answered for you. And so really quickly, though, if you want to see what we're up to throughout the week and get our snide quips about the news of the day, then you should follow us on social media. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/The Valley Labor Report. We are on Twitter at Labor Reporters. I'm on Twitter at JacobM_AL. And if you missed part of the show and want to watch it later, you can go to YouTube at The Valley Labor Report. We also upload the program on more than 11 different podcasting apps, so you can find us on your listening platform of choice at thevalleylaborreport.transistor.fm/subscribe. We have a website where you can buy our hats and stickers. Somebody accidentally bought too many, so we thought we were out, but we've got 2 more that were returned. So if you still want a hat, we've got 2 more left. That is thevalleylaborreport.org. And the best way that you can support the show is by throwing us a couple dollars a month on patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. All right, so everybody, welcome to the show. Connor, thanks for joining us again this month. We really enjoyed talking to you last month. I think it went over incredibly well. I think that it was very well received, and I think that I think that doing this kind of union basics, this education type stuff, is incredibly important because a lot of folks, there are just so many people out there that really haven't the foggiest idea of like what a union does. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join us again this month.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. This is exciting. I enjoyed the first time, and I'm ready for 102.
All right. Yeah. So let's go ahead and think about we'll just I've got some videos queued up that Adam can play for us, but the first thing I want to, and what we want to dwell on for the first little while, we want to kind of go in depth on this, and because, you said that it's something that is actually often forgotten, and that's inoculation. What is inoculation exactly, Connor?
So, I mean, it's really appropriate given, the current moment, but, if you view management propaganda as kind of like a virus that spreads, preparing workers for the message that they're going to receive is kind of inoculating them against that fear, against that kind of management propaganda, because once workers know that this is part of a playbook, that this isn't tailored to them, it's not honest, it's just what an outside union buster is telling management to say, they're a lot more empowered to kind of deal with the information and respond to it appropriately.
Right. So what is the what would you say is kind of the in your dealing with, union campaigns and anti-union campaigns from the boss? What is one of the, what is one of the first things that they tend to say against unions?
Well, one of, I think, the absolute first things that they usually say, especially if, they've been asked to just recognize the union, which is the fairest way to do it, is that they try to kind of make it seem like, well, that would silence some people, that really we feel that like an election is the fairest way to kind of play this process out, that we need to respect the NLRB or, the Public Labor Board process. And I think that that's kind of a key moment that is really important to inoculate against, because it sounds right. It sounds like, oh yeah, okay, an election, like we love elections. And I think that kind of making sure that folks are prepared to understand that, no, you voted when you signed a union card. What they're just trying to do is stall for time. They have the power to recognize the thing that you want right now, and they're just choosing not to. I think that's kind of a key first kind of inoculation moment, is to get rid of kind of the sense of inevitability of an NLRB election and make it clear that, no, like the expectation is that management should recognize you up front. And if there's an election, that's purely because they're trying to stop you from expressing your democratic desire for a union.
Right. Explain to us what so a union authorization card used properly is you saying, and this is what they say, but it's important for union organizers to tell you that this is what it says, that you want a union, that you are a union. You have decided that this is what you want. It's not just something that you sign so you can get an election. It's something that ideally you present to the boss and say, we have come together and we are a union, and we want you to recognize us. Now, if they don't recognize you, then you do need a certain number of those cards signed to trigger an election, like you mentioned, is that's going to be just to stall for time so that they can really ramp up the anti-union campaign. But this is something that I've seen Jane McAlevey talk about in her books, that union organizers even can get wrong when they or that they do incorrectly by telling people that the union authorization card is just to get an election. Like, that's not what it's supposed to be for, right?
Yeah, and I think that that's unfortunately something that is part of the reason that it kind of slides into that, is because a lot of folks, it's uncomfortable to make kind of direct asks of your coworkers, even if you know that it's good for you and it's good for them and it's part of a discussion about building power. It's sometimes hard to make a direct ask like, hey, you're going to support and join the union. And so there's a tendency to just kind of like, okay, I'm going to go for the easier one and say, well, you don't actually have to vote for the union. Like, this is just to get an election. That's absolutely not best practice, like you said, and Jane has really, I think, emphasized that. And I think the best kind of authorization cards explicitly say, no, this isn't just that you want a union. It's not just authorizing that, hey, I want a union. It's also a membership form. I mean, I think the best authorization cards combine both the membership enrollment and the authorization for, yes, I want a union to represent me. And so I think that, of course, is harder because it takes a commitment, but also, like Jane would say, there are no shortcuts to kind of building these kinds of unions, and you can't just kind of take the easier ask and then hope to kind of get people to the right place later.
Right. And, and so let's go ahead and, Adam, get ready, because there's a video that was, I spent hours. So you're welcome, everybody in the audience. I spent hours watching all the anti-union training videos that I could find on YouTube, and Lowe's had there was like an hour and a half just from Lowe's that I watched, and so they had a lot of good, like, super boilerplate, this is what you're going to hear, and so a lot of it is going to come from a Lowe's training video that I watched. I also found some from Walmart and Target and Amazon, but Lowe's had the longest. Like, it's like, I think somebody actually got some of the like a VHS for the whole training program, but and that's not normal. Like when you see these are leaked, right? I mean, they don't want these training videos out in the public. But at Lowe's, they in the training video, they talked about this, and they called the union authorization card like the holy grail for union organizers, and that's the name of the folder that this video is in, Adam. But and they will really take advantage of if you're being a kind of a lazy organizer and you don't tell people that this is to say that you're a union, you're a member of the union, you want to be authorized as a union, and if you tell them that this is just for an election, the boss is really going to take advantage of that. So let's go ahead and play that, Adam.
The holy grail to an organizer is a signed union authorization card. It basically is a legal document that says the employee is giving the union the right to speak for them in terms of wages, benefits, and working conditions. It's like giving the union power of attorney and lets them make binding agreements that employees must live by. If at least 30% of the employees sign those cards, the union can take them to the NLRB and petition for an election. However, most unions will wait until they have at least 50% signed up, and usually closer to 60 to 70%, because they know that many of those people will shift sides during the ongoing campaign. It also makes the union appear to be much stronger than it really might be, and makes employees think they better get on board if they don't want to be left out. There are also some instances where unions can get in a company using authorization cards without an election.
That's enough there.
This sometimes happens in companies that may already.
Yeah, and he was going to talk about card check, which is what you which is what you were talking about, Connor, which is saying, using the card as a like we intend to be a union, and so the management is really they're really going to push that if you're not upfront with them, and you're telling them that that's just going to be for the election, because it's real, it's not just for the election.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is, and just listening to a very small snippet of that, they actually know like how this works. Right. Sophisticated union busters know exactly how this kind of campaign works. They know our playbook as well as we know their playbook. Mm-hmm. And so, I think that one of the things that is really important to keep in mind is, like you said, if you take shortcuts, they will pounce on those shortcuts, and it will lead to bad outcomes. And I just was thinking, like, the whole presentation of, like, this is a binding, legal agreement, yada, yada, yada. It's just like, it's trying to give people the sense of like, oh my God, what did I sign? Like right. Every single time that you read through a terms of service or something and like, oh geez, did I just sign away like my DNA or something? Like right. It's trying to create this perception that, oh my God, I don't know what I actually signed, and to create uncertainty about that. And one of the things that I often hear is kind of a next step is that union avoidance attorneys or union busters will often tell workers, hey, you can get your authorization card back. They'll try to say that you can revoke it. And so that's kind of the next step of that playbook, is getting people to actually pull their cards. So, I mean, but like you said, if you educate people about what the card means up front, that's part of the inoculation as well. Mm-hmm. Because then people are like, okay, yeah, it's, I know exactly what this is, what it does, and I'm totally comfortable with the fact that I signed it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, good education, real good upfront education can also function as inoculation. Another one of the things that they're going to do in an anti-union campaign is they're going to try to make unions look bad as institutions. And one of the things that they say is the union is a business. That's the name of the folder in the next video. So let's go ahead and get that queued up, because they want to, and it's funny that they say a union is a business, and that's supposed to like make them sound bad, but because they're a business, right? They're obviously a business, where a union is not actually a business. But let's go ahead and play that, and what do you think, Connor, this video is going to say?
Honestly, I think that my guess is that it's going to focus on, they just want to sign up members for dues. That's really all it is. They're trying to get dues revenue. They make money off of you paying dues. And they might even throw something in that, look, unions are in decline. And so they're trying to sign up as many people as they can to, avoid that.
Yeah, and I wanted to give you the chance to do that so that the audience knows just how boilerplate these things are, because that's almost exactly what they say. Adam, go ahead and roll that clip.
A union is not a charity. It's not a club, and it's not part of the government. It's a business that has to take in money to survive, but it doesn't have any products to sell. All it has is memberships to sell. A union's only source of income is the money they charge members.
Money for initiation, dues, and fines, and assessments. You get the picture. So it's pretty obvious that the fewer members their business has, the less money they collect.
The union's only alternative is to get more people to pay their hard-earned money to them in dues every month.
And that's becoming more and more of a problem for unions every day. 50 years ago, 1 out of every 3 workers was in a union. Today,
Yep. See, so that's everything. Everything that you said, Connor, is like that's what they're going to find. And that was actually from a Target anti-union video, but they also had stuff like that in the Lowe's and in the Amazon. It's really all the same. What is your response, or how do you inoculate workers against this misinformation from management before they hear it?
Well, I think that one of the first things is, again, this is part of, I think, a broader trend in anti-union campaigns trying to make the union seem like an outside party that you're paying money to. And I think that a good, well-organized campaign is driven by the workers and empowers the workers, and they understand that they have ownership of it in a way that really makes that message not land effectively, because they're going to look around themselves and say, no, we're making the decisions. We're not paying money to some outside party. The union is us. Right. And so I think that's one of the best things that you can do to kind of strengthen a campaign against that kind of approach, and then just make people understand what those dues are for, and that management is going to tell you this. Understanding that those dues are about collective power. Management has buckets of money, as shown by the amount of money that they spend on union, quote unquote, avoidance consultants. All we have is organized people and organized money. And dues are just organized money, and how it's used is decided by the membership of the union. So ultimately, this is money that's accountable to those members, that they decide how it's used. I don't know of any workplace where, certainly not in the United States, where workers have any voice in how capital in the business is directed or invested or, reinvested in the enterprise. So, I mean, it's trying to create this false equivalence, like, well, why would you even trust them? They're just a business, they're just trying to scam you. But I mean, it's very clearly different.
Right. Well, that's a really good segue into the open door policy, right? This is something that you're going to hear anytime that you want to try to talk about organizing, about making your job better. They're going to say that if you get a union in here, you can't talk to me. And now, I mean, like, how often do you actually talk to your boss about things that bother you? And how often, if you do that, how often does that actually get resolved? Right? The answer is not very often, but they want to. And during union campaigns, one of the things that they'll try to do is they will try to be more responsive. This is something that we heard from people down in Amazon, that in Bessemer, that they never, the management, the supervisors never cared about what they had to say before, but all of a sudden, once the campaign became real, they had a manager or supervisor come in every 2 or 3 minutes, like, hey, is there anything that I can get, anything that you need, anything that you want to talk about, like, I just want to check in on you and see how you're doing. We've got an open door policy here and things like that, and it's just I mean, it's not true for one, but you know, I mean, in reality, what they are trying to make you believe is that you have a real say on the job now. That's what they're trying to make you believe. And the reality is that you don't, and that the best way to secure a voice on the job is to unionize, right? I mean, is there anything that you would want to add to that before we play one of those videos?
Nope, that sounds pretty much right on the nose to me.
Yeah, let's go ahead and play the first video in that folder there, Adam.
You heard about it, but some of the people in our area have been thinking about getting a union here.
They said that you didn't really care one way or another. Is that true?
Well, that's a good question, and I'm glad you asked about it, because I do care. And the bottom line is that Lowe's feels that unions aren't in our best interests, and that we can work better without a third party getting in the middle of things. We just think that they aren't needed here. I mean, we've got an open door policy. We've got other procedures already in place to deal with problems that might come up. So I agree with that 100%.
Well, they said that a union would make
Okay, let's go ahead and pause that real quick, and then we'll hit on the what she's about to say there. But yeah, I mean, that's exactly what they're going to say. I mean, Connor, how much control, how much of a voice on the job do you really think that people have without a union?
Really not that much. And I think that the bottom line is it's as much as management wants to give you.
Right.
You don't have any independent power behind how much of a say that you have. It's purely as much as management wants to give you. And getting back to kind of the inoculation piece, this is one of those things that I think you can really kind of anticipate, is that playing people through the scenario of what actually happens when you go to management and bring them a problem. And I think one of the scenarios that I really like to kind of walk through with workers is, okay, have you ever gone to management with a problem? Okay, kind of what happened. And usually it's the best case scenario is they listened sympathetically, but nothing ever happened. There are very few instances. In fact, I've never had a worker in a campaign tell me, oh, they listened, they dealt with it right then. Never, right. I've never once heard that. So
right.
Taking it to the next logical step, okay, let's just take the example of like a school. What happens if the entire custodial staff goes to the maintenance supervisor with a problem? What if they all go? Well, that's a little bit different. And then you start getting results. And it kind of gets them to the idea that, okay, when they say that they have an open door policy, they're not going to get anything from that. And with the support of a union, you will have something and some ability to actually get management to respond.
Right. Yeah, and that's a good. I wouldn't have thought to say that here, but that's a good point. That to the extent maybe you do have some sort of a voice on the job wherever you work in a non-union facility, but the voice comes at the complete and the complete discretion of the boss. Like you said, there is no, if you get a new boss tomorrow, or if he forgets to drink his coffee in the morning, it can all be gone at the drop of a hat, where your ability to influence the job, influence your working conditions is you can actually do that without without your boss, his mood changing your ability to influence your working conditions. And that's a really great point, Connor.
Right. I mean, how good is an open door if it can be opened and closed at will without your input?
Right. And the we had somebody in the chat, Pierre, mentioned that an open door policy can identify workers who will stand up. So open dooring an issue can actually get you fired, or could lead to potential disciplinary actions on your part if you take advantage of that open door policy. Yeah,
I mean, I was just talking to a nurse who was talking about how she worked in a non-union workplace for a little bit before moving into a union job. And, being that person that asks questions get the target painted on your back as a troublemaker.
Yeah. Exactly. That it really, and with the target on your back as a troublemaker, without a union, you can really be in some real trouble there. That's gonna, it can make your life difficult.
And I think we have to be real that is a tactic that some managers use. Not all are just outright bullies who, yell and scream in the workplace. There are plenty who take the sympathetic ear, invite you in the door, fix you a cup of coffee so that you spill your guts, and now they know everything they need to know to, tamp down any dissatisfaction and to keep an eye on you, the person who complained.
Yep. So we've talked, so some of the things that we've talked about, they're gonna, they're gonna try to make the union look bad. They're going to, push about, the things that ostensibly you have already without a union. They're going to want to try to make it sound like, oh, your life is so good already. Why would you even need a union? They're going to try to make the unions look bad. But also some of the next things that they're going to try to do is to say that they're going to do one, or they're going to do both things, these two things. They're going to say that the union will actually make it worse. And we're going to talk about some of the ways that they say that unions can make things worse, and also that unions won't change any, that they can't guarantee any changes, right? So they're going to say that they'll make it worse potentially, or they won't be able to change. The only thing that's going to change is you're going to get dues taken out of your paycheck. So we're going to talk about those two things on the other side of this break. Then we're going to be talking about some bargaining your first contract once you win a union election. We are going over Unions 102 with Connor Lewis from Strikewave. Really enjoying the conversation. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Huntsville's #1 news, talk, and weather station. WVNN Athens. WVNN FM Trinity. A Cumulus station. It's 10 o'clock.
From ABC News, I'm Brian Clark. Exactly 16 years after Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans is once again bracing for a major storm. The hurricane set to arrive tomorrow or early Monday. New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell says,
"Time is not on our side."
She says people within the city's levee system should shelter in place. The area could see up to 12 feet of storm surge with punishing winds from Hurricane Ida.
The prediction right now is that Ida will be a Category 4 storm when it makes landfall Sunday or early Monday, leaving little time for people like Alan Bourne to prepare.
I think everyone needs to get ready, and I hope we all come out of this safely and without too much damage.
With Ida bearing down, Bourne is trying to stay optimistic.
Hopefully it doesn't come here and all this is in vain, but we got to be prepared.
Jim Ryan, ABC News, New Orleans.
The Pentagon will provide an update this morning on the evacuation process from Afghanistan. The White House said this morning nearly 112,000 people have been evacuated, but the danger of that work in Kabul was underscored Thursday after an explosion killed 13 U.S. service members, including 20-year-old Marine Riley McCollum, remembered by his father in Wyoming.
Did what he thought he needed to do to help somebody else, and that's just the kind of person he was. He would give up himself for anybody at any time.
President Biden's national security team warning him another attack is likely. It's a march today in Washington, D.C. calling for voting rights legislation.
Thousands of marchers in the streets of Washington, D.C. for the 58th anniversary of the March on Washington. Reverend Al Sharpton leading the group from McPherson Square to the National Mall in front of Capitol Hill. This year, these marchers are walking the streets to urge Congress to pass voting rights legislation.
That's ABC's Ike Ejachi. You're listening to ABC News.
Nielsen says more than 30 million Americans watch Newsmax. It's the 4th highest rated cable news channel, and it's available on all major cable systems, or find it on smart TVs like Samsung, LG, and more. And it's free on Roku, Zumo, Pluto, Amazon Fire, and TiVo. Or download the Newsmax app on your smartphone. Watch it anytime, anywhere. Forbes calls Newsmax a news powerhouse. Millions of Americans are watching Newsmax. You should too. Tune in today.
The pandemic's reminded us we live in a sea of airborne germs that can assault us with every breath. Your nose is the body's first line of defense by helping filter out allergens, bacteria, and viruses before they reach your lungs. So how do you clean your nose? ADVERTISERS is powered suction to flush out mucus and germs that cause congestion or worse, can make you sick. Over 2 million people use Navage to breathe better, sleep deeper, snore less, and feel healthier without drugs. Go to Navage.com or find Navage at Walgreens, CVS, Rite Aid, Bed Bath, and Target.
For up-to-the-minute news, log on to WVNN.com. Depend on it.
You count the principal J-Rig at your You count the fire at your You count the principal J-Rig at your You count the
Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller. We are joined by Connor Lewis. He is a union staffer in Pennsylvania. He is a member of the independent labor journalism collective Strikewave, and we are talking Unions 102. Last month, we did a Unions 101 episode where we went over the super basics. We went over, like, what is a union? How do you get one? How do they work? What can they do for you? Some really basic stuff. This week, we are talking about what the employer, what your boss is going to try to do to keep you from having a union and convince you that it is not in your best interest when it very clearly is. And we're going to go into some bargaining, what it's going to be like when you actually get to help write the contract you work under. It's so we're if you missed Unions 101 last month, you can find that on our podcast feed or our YouTube channel, the valleylaborreport.transistor.fm/subscribe or YouTube at the Valley Labor Report. Good places to go. And if you want to learn more about what's happening in the labor community, you have got to check out Strikewave. It is thestrikewave.org. It is a fantastic place to go. They have stories that no one else has and in ways that no one else has it. It's a really good place. They've got a newsletter you should sign up for. You can sign up for it on their website, thestrikewave.org. Great place to go. Really, really great place. So we appreciate Connor's time today. And we had another person mention in the chat that, and I want to repeat what they said for everybody listening on the radio, because it's such a good point before we go into what they're going to say about what unions can and can't do. He said on the issue of unions being a business and trying to, unions only want to organize because they're a business, and so we just want to regenerate, and like it's a profit motive, and that's the only thing motivating unions. And so therefore unions are bad. Jeb, who is a member of the iron workers here in the area, he said that I'd love to see these businesses have pre-approval by their employees for all expenditures the way that the union does. Not a penny is spent that my membership doesn't know about and approve. And that's so important, right? Like, businesses don't operate that way. Every penny is that is spent by unions is they make that aware to their membership, and it has to be approved by their membership. That is something that simply does not happen with businesses. That level of transparency, that democratic input, which really kind of puts the notion of unions as a business to bed, because businesses are top-down hierarchical institutions that the people at the bottom don't have any control over. And that's just simply not the way that unions operate.
I think that's a really important point. I'm glad you emphasized that, because all unions vary in how democratic they are, how transparent they are, and some, have some room for progress. That's, we've never shied away from that on this show. But even those who have their issues are far more democratic and far more transparent than any company will ever be.
Yeah.
The company has no reason to do that. And the only way you have any sort of transparency or democracy in the workplace is by organizing and having a union. So I'm glad, thanks, Jeb, for pointing that out.
Yeah. Yeah, we love Jeb. The Ironworkers are a proud sponsor of the show. We are proud to have them as well. Love Jeb, love the Ironworkers here. So,
and let me just say, you're talking about inoculation and what companies do to convince you that you do not need a union. And I've seen this meme go around on social media, and it's just one of the truest things I've ever seen. That much like condoms, if someone is trying really hard to convince you don't need a union, that is all the more reason that you need one.
Yeah, exactly. So let's go ahead and talk about what the employer is going to try to do to convince you that not only is your life great now, you don't need to change it, but unions might not do anything to change it, or they might make it worse. So this video is going to be in the unions can't guarantee folder. Let's go ahead and just play the first video there and see what they say.
All right, let's cue this up. We got more lows on the way, it seems.
Yeah. Collective bargaining is when the union and the company meet and negotiate in an attempt to reach agreement over such things as wages, benefits, and working conditions. Both parties have an obligation to bargain in good faith, which means they must have the intention of reaching an agreement. However, neither party is compelled to make any concessions or agree to anything that is not in its best interest. What that means for employees is that no matter what an organizer might have promised them, the company does not have to give in to any union demands. It becomes a game of give and take, with both sides usually making deals to get what it wants. In the end, when the ink is dry, employees might find themselves with a better overall package. They might find that they have almost exactly the same things, or, as happens in many cases, they find that they have actually ended up with less than they started with.
Yeah, many cases. Okay,
Be aware
that's enough.
that the union may use a half-truth.
I mean,
like a lot of really effective propaganda, there's just enough elements of truth in there to, lull you to sleep.
Right. Yeah, so let's talk about that first. In many cases, employees are going to find themselves worse off, actually. I mean, Connor, let's talk about in many cases. How often does that happen?
With a first contract, I would say pretty much never. I think that, if you look at some of the kind of legacy units that have been around for a long time that are fighting off concessions, that might be a little bit more true, but at the same time, they're still better off than they would be if management could just close down the plant and offshore it. So, I mean,
right.
I don't know how you can really say that that's worse off, but as far as first contracts, I think that what they're really kind of choosing to leave out there is that those people, the employees that are watching the video, will get to vote on any agreement before it's actually approved. Right. So if it's an agreement that they're not just going to wake up one morning and be handed a collective bargaining agreement, they're going to be part of the process, they're going to get updates, they're going to be involved in it, and they're going to have a democratic say over, is this good enough or is this not good enough? So the idea that they're just going to wake up and have a CBA handed to them is just not real.
That's exactly right. And that's something that Amazon was really pushing hard during the Bessemer campaign, that they can't promise you anything. They can't promise you anything. And that's true, because it's not they who are going to be doing anything. Fundamentally, it's you. The workers in Bessemer were the ones that had the power to get a union in, and once they got a union in, if they had gotten one in, then they would have had the power to bargain the contract. They would have elected a bargaining committee from the rank and file. They would have probably done surveys to see what the priorities of the membership were, and they would have bargained themselves. Why? Because they would have been, and they are, the union. There's not, you don't have these... it's not as top down as they want to make it seem. Like you said, any contract would have to be voted on by them. And if they don't like the contract, they can say no, go back to the bargaining table and try it again because we don't like it. So that's a good thing that you mentioned. In one of the other videos, they said that, let me show you some contracts where they gave concessions. And it's exactly like you mentioned, on a first contract, you are almost never going to be better or worse off than you began. But if you've been in a legacy agreement, or you've been in a union for a long time, the boss, it's possible that maybe this contract is worse than your last contract, but that's not the thing for people to compare it to. It is in a non-union environment. Now, in a union environment, there are things that you should be doing to organize to get better contracts and fight off concessions, yes. But in a non-union environment, which is what probably 80-90% of our audience is, that's not what you need to be comparing it to, the contract that this union has versus their last one. It's look at their contract that they've got now versus the conditions that you're working under, the wages that you have. And I can almost guarantee you, if you're in the same industry, that it's going to be better for them. They're going to have a better contract than you do. And so that's really important for people to recognize when, and like we elaborated on this dynamic last month when we were doing our Unions 101 episode. And the reason that happens, that unions are able to get good contracts, is because collective bargaining inherently gives more power to the employee because of the because of the collectivization of the interests and the labor of the workers, because all of the workers at a Lowe's are going to have more power than one worker at the Lowe's. I mean, it's really easy to, it's really easy to think about, or it's really easy to understand. And when they don't say that unions can't guarantee this or that thing, they're going to point at things that unions do try to do and try to twist it and make it sound bad. One of the things that unions often bargain for is seniority, and that's a good thing. I think that if you talk to anybody, you're gonna think that, oh yeah, if I have given my 30 best years to a company, I should have some protection that people who just started working here last week, they might not have. I think if you talk to anybody, I think that makes sense. But let's go to seniority in the folder, Adam, and see how they try to twist it and make seniority a bad thing.
Well, thanks for coming in. As you know, we need to talk about the vacancy in your department and who's the best person to fill it. And I've asked Tom to sit in since he's the union steward now.
Oh, well, I think Jim has done the best job of anyone, and he'd make a good choice.
Hold on now. I have the seniority list right here, and it says that Andy's number one. Now, Jim's way down the list here.
Well, yeah, but Andy isn't really the leader that Jim is.
Well, is Andy a bad employee?
No, he does all right, but Jim...
Well, then is he a discipline problem?
No, not really, although his attendance could be better.
I see. Well, does he have any warnings for bad attendance?
No, but Jim is a better worker. And
well, I'm sorry, but the contract the company signed clearly states that we go by seniority, which makes Andy the only choice. So if you folks will excuse me, I'm off to give Andy the good news.
All right. So Connor, what's your first take on that?
I wish to God I had that much power. Oh my God, that's wild. Yeah. I mean, no union steward, no union rep can cruise into a meeting with that kind of energy. I mean, that's just not how it works. I think that the idea that, first off, the idea that management is legitimately making the best decisions based on performance, any employee can tell you flat out, that's not how it works. Management plays favorites. They do not actually have like an objective view of employee performance and who's going to do the best job. They're going to play favorites. And I think that anyone intuitively knows that that's how management operates. They are going to put the person they want, whether or not that person is the right person for the job. And that's just ultimately how it's going to play out. And even if there are, evaluation or performance, like measurement systems in place, we all know as well that on any kind of evaluation, the outcome is going to depend on what mood your boss is in that day. I mean, those are not fair or objective. So the idea that you suddenly have, a union steward swaggering into a meeting to just pull out the seniority list and say, well, this person's getting the job. One, that's not how it works. And two, I think that if you take a step back and actually look at, okay, how does this decision-making process work? And how does management actually decide? In my experience, how do they decide who gets, the job? Well, usually the people that get promoted are the people that aren't arguing with management and do whatever management wants, not necessarily the best person for the job. So, the whole premise of it is just totally off from, I think, what any worker has experienced in their workplace. And that's when you get back to the fact that, ultimately there is no perfectly fair system. Seniority is the fairest of the possible situations. And I think it's reasonable that, look, if this employee is not a bad employee, they've done their work, they've, put in their time, they've gained experience that other employees may not have, then that employee, should get the opportunity for a promotion.
Right. And, this is something that RWDSU was mentioning to employees, that seniority isn't the only thing that people bargain for, and you can bargain for. And in a lot of contracts, they do have performance-based raises and promotions as well as seniority. So it's not an either-or thing. You can have both, and you can fight for both. And who decides what to fight for? It's the membership, right? So if you want more performance-based raises and promotions, or you want performance to count for a higher, to count for more in that decision-making process, then do that. It's up to you. You're the union.
Yeah, the idea, again, that there's just this one way that unions do things. There are ways that, in my experience, I have, a perspective on kind of the best case scenario of how things should operate, but ultimately unions as an outside party or whatever, don't impose things on workers. Whatever actually comes out of it is going to be what the workers want, just like you said. So if they genuinely want something that's more performance-based or whatever, then they can do that. And ultimately, transferring between positions, not every contract says that, it's automatically going to go to the person with seniority. Absolutely. That's not what every contract says. A lot of them still give management discretion over, who actually gets the position.
Right. Yeah, their portrayal of the union steward and the contract, that would be a crazy contract, right? That for any company to agree to, and that's not the kind of contracts that are actually signed, that give that have that much power for the workers, which that would be great if that was the type of contract that gave unions unilateral control over, the workers' unilateral control over who got promoted and how, that would be great, but that's not the world that we live in, clearly.
Well, and clearly, yeah, go ahead, Connor.
That's something that realistically, that was a big part of what unions pushed for up until the 1950s, and that kind of more control over the operations, over kind of these kinds of decisions. And ultimately, we were forced to kind of give that up. Now, whether or not that's a good thing, I think it's a bad thing. But that is the world that we live in, that we don't have the level of power that they're trying to portray in there. Now, I wish we did, because I think that anyone would agree that workers are going to make better decisions about those things than management usually is, but that's just not the world we inhabit.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely the case. And talk to us. You've mentioned this before, the Treaty of Detroit, in some of your writings. Can you give us a rundown of exactly what that is in relation to worker control of what happens in the company?
So the very, very kind of brief kind of summary of it is the Treaty of Detroit was this contract that was signed between General Motors and the UAW. I think it was 1950, And one of the big pushes that the UAW had been really kind of angling for was more control over business decisions, more control over actual directing the enterprise, not just, shop floor decisions, but also big picture decisions about how General Motors and also Chrysler and Ford were actually managed. With the idea that workers should have much more control in how the operation actually worked. And so what ended up happening, which ended up, I think, kind of setting the pattern for how contracts and collective bargaining law evolved over the next, up until now, is they ended up giving that up and ceding the idea that management has inherent rights that they don't have to bargain over, that they just automatically have, which the default one is, to control and direct the operations of, the enterprise. And they also gave up a 5-year agreement, which up until that point, the UAW had really only agreed to 1-year agreements, and they almost always led to strikes. And so GM and then Chrysler and Ford signed similar agreements. So they gave up a lot of stuff on the economic end. They gave up profit sharing. They gave up pretty good health insurance, pensions, that kind of thing, wage increases that really kind of vaulted UAW workers into the middle class. But UAW gave up this push for more actual power over how the business operated, which ended up really, not playing out too great over the course of the next, especially once you got into the 1970s. That really ended up, I think, hamstringing not just the UAW, but a lot of organized labor.
Right. So the next the next thing that unions bargain for that they're going to try to twist into a bad thing is, is job descriptions, is making it if you are assigned to a job, making it so that your job description is defined and you can't be made to go outside of your job description without additional pay, right? Or how else would you describe that kind of clause in a contract? I'm not terribly familiar with it myself, but it's really common in a lot of contracts. Can you explain that for us, Connor?
I mean, depending on exactly how it's written, it's not really diversion of work, but basically if you're working outside of your classification, the interpretation usually from unions is that you should get paid for the rate of the work that you're doing. So, if you're paid, let's say you're a high school paraprofessional and they assign you to some custodial work, and you normally get paid, $12 and custodial gets paid $15. For the time that you're doing that custodial work, you should be getting paid $15 rather than $12 because that's the value that the contract assigns to that work. And so just kind of figuring out is this within my job or is it within a different job under the same contract, and what rate am I going to get paid? I don't know that there's really necessarily an umbrella term for it, but kind of that's a typical way that unions will look at, working outside of a job description or classification.
All right. Yeah. And so the folder that this is under, Adam, is rigidity. Let's go. Let's play that the first video there and see what they say about this phenomenon in contracts.
If the unions did try to organize target team members, they could also try and bring along their way of doing business, an old-fashioned rigid structure.
Old-fashioned is right. Being able to change quickly and adapt to new opportunities, being flexible. That's the key to running a successful business in today's market, and we've got the flexibility now.
Right you are. No one knows exactly what could happen, but there are lots of examples of how rigid grocery store union contracts could hurt our store's ability to serve guests and actually hurt our team members in the process.
And sorry, I thought there was that wasn't the one, or that wasn't the one I was thinking about. Go to the second one in that folder.
There's actually not a second
Oh,
one.
there's not a second one?
Not
Oh,
under
okay,
rigid
man.
structure, no.
Oh, man, I'm sorry about that. Well, so the video that I was thinking of, they gave a situation where a customer needed something in a different department in the store, and the worker wouldn't be able, under this imaginary union contract, they wouldn't be able to help this customer, right? And and I mean, like, it's this, again, that's like not the type of contract that you're actually going to see, right?
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about like trying to play that out. I mean, an employee will, even if they're, assigned to one department or something, they can at least direct you to the right person for the next one. I mean, I don't even understand, like, a contract wouldn't create that problem. Like, I don't understand their argument as far as it creating a situation where customer service, suffers. But I mean, I think that, like, taking the example of like a grocery store, if you've got, like, for example, a cashier that's getting paid at a certain rate, and then you ask them to go work in the back, in the back of the store, stocking shelves or something, and that's like a different classification paid at a different rate, and maybe potentially a higher rate, then, I mean, they can still be directed to do that. There's nothing stopping management from having someone work outside of classification. It's purely a question of what rate are they going to get paid.
Right. And is management willing to do that? Maybe you could concoct a scenario where management is simply not willing to pay a cashier stocking money, and so therefore, under the rules that management has created, cashiers can't do this or that thing, and maybe that makes it more rigid. But that's a result of management.
Right. I mean, realistically, a lot of kind of union busting rhetoric is actually stuff that is ultimately the fault of management that they're then punting onto unions as they're the bad guys. I mean, it's the same thing when you get a lot of these kinds of, one of the things I constantly hear is, greedy unions closing down factories. And it's like, no, it's unions expecting a reasonable, like, refusing to take concessions. That's not greed. That's corporate greed that unions are standing up to. But suddenly it becomes, greedy unions are closing down factories. I mean, it's in that same situation, it's them placing a management problem. We don't want to pay someone the actual value of the work that they're doing, and then making it somehow the union's, fault.
Right. Yeah, we are coming up on our final break. We've got one more segment with Connor Lewis going over some more stuff in unions, and we're going to round out. We're going to round out with the reason that all of this, and they accidentally told the truth in one of them, and so we're going to play that. We're going to have some laughs, and then we're going to talk about negotiating a contract with Connor Lewis, union staffer from Pennsylvania, a member of the independent labor journalism collective Strikewave. Folks, you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. Stay tuned.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison. This is News Talk 770 AM, 92.5 FM, WVNN. News starts now.
Hurricane Ida could make landfall in Louisiana late Sunday or Monday as a Category 4 hurricane with winds of 140 miles an hour. But ABC meteorologist Rob Marciano says storm surge and heavy rains are also major concerns.
The rainfall is going to go into Mississippi. It's going to go into Tennessee, which has already seen extraordinary flooding over the past 2 weeks. So this is not just a Louisiana event. This is going to impact the entire Southeast, especially in the way of more flooding.
The mayor of New Orleans says anyone inside the city's levee system should shelter in place. The Pentagon now says 2 ISIS-K targets were killed in an apparent drone attack in Afghanistan. Authorities have not said if there's a link between those people and the attack in Kabul Thursday that killed 13 American service members. Today in Washington, it's the March for Voting Rights, calling for federal voting legislation. It's the 58th anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. Brian Clark, ABC.
WVNN. Depend on it.
What a couple of hillbillies can do.
Labor creates all wealth. All wealth should go to labor. My name is Jacob Morrison. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report. I'm here with my co-host, Adam Keller. We are joined by Connor Lewis. He is a union staffer in Pennsylvania. He is a member of the independent labor journalism collective, Strikewave. And we have set aside the agenda for today, and we are talking about unions. We are talking about some of the things that the boss is going to try to tell you to convince you not to join a union. We've been going over some really important stuff, some really serious stuff, and so now we're gonna have a couple of laughs. So Adam, go to the new terminology folder, and this is where they're telling managers what to look out for. That there might be a union drive in your store. So go ahead and play that, and we'll see what they want managers to look out for.
The sudden use of new terminology favored by unions, such as dignity and respect, grievance.
Okay, that's it. Yeah. If you start
bargaining.
If you start talking about dignity and respect, then
how dare you?
You might have a union on your hands. I mean, maybe that's, I guess if you, but really, if you want dignity and respect, even management is saying right there, you need to join a union.
That is a peak example of telling on yourself.
Yeah. I really enjoyed that one. That was great. And so, speaking of telling on yourself, this is the last video that I wanted to make sure that we played. And this video, Adam, is going to be in a different perspective, in the different perspective folder. And this is from a Lowe's video training managers on how to bust a union. And this is the opening to a segment that they say they're going to show you, they're going to look at things through a different perspective. Adam, let's play that.
As part of the program, we're going to look at your role as a manager from a different perspective than you're used to, one that is often overlooked. We're going to look at a manager's job at Lowe's through the eyes of your employees. After all, they are the ones who really make things happen. Without them, you'd be in charge of a huge inventory with no one to help market it.
That's
we'll take
right.
a closer look at what
That's
employees
right.
are
That's
looking
it.
for.
Okay.
They get
right.
it. Apparently they get it.
That's labor creates all wealth, and Lowe's admitted it. I mean, holy crap.
That is fantastic.
Man, it would really suck to be a manager and actually have to do some work because you didn't have your workers around.
Holy crap. Oh, my gosh. I mean, how...
That's fantastic. Well, fine. They can pack it up. We'll just do the work for them.
Woo.
If you want to cut costs, start there. You've admitted who does the work and who doesn't.
Right.
You're looking to slash costs. We can find some places for you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, wow. If talk about letting the mask slip. And that's one of the reasons, because like I said, this isn't something that they're going to show to employees, right? They don't want their employees getting any uppity thoughts. This is what they're showing to managers. And so they're trying to instill in the managers the importance of not allowing workers to know this. They don't want workers to realize that they just said they're the ones who make, quote, everything work. Workers are the ones that make everything work according to the boss. Okay?
Just don't let on that that's true, because then they might dare to ask for such things as dignity or respect.
Yeah. Okay.
Those dangerous concepts.
Right. Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
so,
you definitely, those people that don't do anything definitely need to watch out for dignity and respect.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think we've had enough fun with that. Connor, so we're we spent a long time, longer than I thought we would, but I think it's good. I think it's good stuff, on the inoculation, on like what you can expect from the manager during a union campaign. You've made it through the union campaign. You have won. You are a union. And now it's time to bargain your first union contract. Connor, what are some of the things that people can expect?
So tying it back to kind of the whole campaign period and the inoculation piece, one of the things that you mentioned is that management often says there are no promises, there are no guarantees, that there's a give and take. One of the things that they often will say is that you start from a blank slate, which is basically trying to create the maximum level of uncertainty. That's not exactly true, because there is a status quo requirement after a union is certified that management can't change your working conditions, including reducing pay or changing compensation, until a contract is negotiated. So they can't unilaterally just make things worse. They have to actually bargain with the union, and anything that comes out of that is going to be voted on by the members. So, this whole kind of idea of creating this uncertainty that something is just going to happen and it's outside of your control is trying to make you feel like, well, you're still going to have the same powerlessness you have right now. Whereas, the reality is, no, you have control over what comes out of the bargaining process, because you're going to be part of, creating what that agreement is going to look like. And you're also going to have the right to vote over what it looks like. So some of the things that I think show the level of power and input you have that you just don't have in a non-union workplace is any kind of contract or proposal that the union brings to management is going to be decided by the workers. There are a couple of different ways that you can do that. Unions are often going to immediately start surveying people about what they want out of a contract. That's a very standard way of doing it. Often you'll get employee surveys that are kind of thrown out by management, but everyone knows that those never actually lead to anything. Whereas with a union survey, you're collecting this information and it leads directly to what are we proposing to management. So that's one of the key ways in which unions give you the voice that management is only pretending to give you. And I think that's kind of a key distinction is your input is being solicited, but it's actually being listened to and is directly informing the entire process. And unions will often do shift meetings or that kind of thing. They'll do, regular kind of one of the things that I personally like to do is to go building to building and actually talk to people like, what's making your job harder? What would make it easier? What are the things that you like, to try to get a sense of how do you feel about your workplace and what are the things that we can do to make sure that the good things stay the way they are and that the not so great things are improved. And so these are the ways that they kind of inform how are we going to put together the proposal. And then what happens is that on a technical perspective is the union says, look, we're going to negotiate, we're going to set bargaining dates. They'll create a bargaining team. Often the bargaining team is going to be elected by the membership. So you have a direct say in who's actually going to represent you in negotiations. And then they're going to sit down with management and actually start negotiating. Usually a union is going to bring a first proposal, though not always. And then, you go back and forth over proposals to try to reach an ultimate agreement. And once you have a sense that you have a tentative agreement, you bring it back to the membership for yes or no. If they vote yes, then you move forward with it. If you vote no, then the union goes back to the bargaining table or may start thinking about doing something like a strike authorization vote. But ultimately, I think that the process is really on the front end. There's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of trying to get a sense of what the priorities are and what we need to accomplish and building consensus around that. And again, workers actually have a say in who's going to go to the bargaining table for them. So, you actually choose your representatives. You choose the people that you feel are going to represent your interests, and you get to decide what those interests are. So, I mean, that's kind of how the bargaining process kind of kicks off.
Right. The bargaining committee in virtually all, maybe all, contract negotiations includes people from the rank and file, like actually people who are going to, maybe you or people that you work right beside on the day-to-day, they are going to be elected by their coworkers to actually bargain, sit across the table from the boss, and do these negotiations. And oftentimes they'll be sent for training on like how to do bargaining, like how contract language is written. Can you talk to us about some of those trainings that people can expect if they're members of the bargaining committee?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of what you're going to get is a lot of training on both process, just kind of making sure that folks understand how the bargaining process works from a legal perspective, but also, what makes a good contract? What are the elements of a contract that maximizes worker protection? What are things that, we do encourage? What are some proposals we may see that here are the reasons that we may oppose it? What are the ways that we can create the fairest kind of compensation structure for workers that we possibly can? I mean, there will be a lot of really in-depth training on both the process as well as, okay, we've gathered all this information about what workers are hoping to accomplish. What are the ways that we can actually put this into good contract language that we can enforce? And so that's very, very standard. Like every union is going to offer training for workers that are going to be involved in contract negotiations to help them feel confident that, okay, I understand what I've been told by the membership, and here's how I best accomplish that. So, it's not like you're just kind of thrown into bargaining with, a massive corporation or whatever. You have support from the international union or your local to actually train you on this is how it works. And then you have ongoing support from, staff. There are research departments that unions have that can help do corporate research on, big corporations or, just financials and that kind of thing. So it's not like you're just thrown into it. You have this incredible support network, which is going back to this whole idea that it's a business. That's what the dues pay for, is this support network that helps you bargain and enforce good contracts.
Right.
So, the workers are up front. The workers ultimately are deciding what happens, but there is a support network for them to help them on their, on their own end approach that process from a stance of, knowing that I'm confident that I know how this works, that I know, what makes a good contract and what makes a bad contract. And then there's a huge kind of support network, whether it's organizers, researchers, whatever, to help them accomplish getting that good contract.
Yeah, well, accomplishing getting the good contract, what do the negotiations actually look like, and maybe even what should they look like? Because there are some differences in how negotiations are done, and that's something that you and I've seen you really rely on Jane's work advocating for open bargaining. Maybe talk to us about that process.
Yeah, so traditionally, and one thing I will preface this all with is that negotiations are not easy, and for the people that do it or for anyone. And I don't think that there's any use sugarcoating that. I don't think that should discourage people, but I think that people, need to kind of know what they're getting into up front, because, depending on how negotiations are structured, we're talking some very, very long hours and some very, very stressful situations. As far as kind of the process, one of the things that unions have traditionally done is a very kind of closed bargaining process where you have a limited team that negotiates with management, and updates to the membership are not necessarily that informative. And part of this is, a sense that the negotiation process is really kind of a closed process, that's what produces the best outcomes. it's really just kind of a philosophical approach to bargaining that I think there's a reason behind it, and there's a genuine belief, I think, among some people that it delivers the best outcomes for workers. But I think that what we've grown to see, especially over the past couple of decades, is that it really doesn't. And so you mentioned, Jane, and the Labor Center at UC Berkeley actually put out this report taking a couple of case studies from Unite Here, NJEA, the New Jersey NEA affiliate of teachers and support staff, and then also the News Guild, talking about open bargaining. And the idea is that instead of just a couple of people at the bargaining table, we're going to opt for big bargaining. And actually also there was a nurses union affiliate included in that. I think it was Massachusetts. And so the idea of big bargaining teams, instead of 5 people at the table, let's have 100 nurses at the table. Let's involve more people. Really kind of give the membership more of a direct role in the negotiations themselves. And one of the benefits of that is that, one, scares the hell out of management. Yeah. So that's always fun, and it's also useful. But it also, I think, really kind of shows people what it takes to actually get the kinds of things that they want. The level of work and commitment and ownership over making that happen. And I think that one of the things that is also a huge advantage of opening up the bargaining process is I've lost count of the number of people that really kind of they understood the need for the union, but they ultimately thought that okay, well, this manager isn't that bad of a guy. He really has our best interests at heart. This should be an easy process. We're just going to talk and we're going to come to an agreement. And then I think that they realize when the mask comes off at the bargaining table, what the real relationship there is between, what the real relationship between labor and management is. And so it's a really eye-opening experience for a lot of workers to actually be exposed to, this is what management actually thinks about me and about my role in the workplace. And so I think that one of the things kind of a fear of that. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I lost you for a second. I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. There's a kind of fear of that proposal kind of getting out there. And one of the things that I really kind of put to bargaining teams is every single thing that you propose, you can defend. You can give this proposal to a person off the street and tell them exactly why it's necessary, why it's going to lead to, better schools. So why be scared of owning that and making clear that taking on the mantle of we're fighting for better schools, better workplaces. We're fighting for all of the things that the community should want. And I think that, that could be extended to pretty much any workplace, that we're the ones actually fighting for making this a better workplace, a better enterprise, a better newsroom, whatever, a better hospital. And so I think that instead of being scared about that kind of transparency, I think we should use it. And I think that Jane's, again, I really encourage folks that are, a little bit more involved in this work to take a look at Jane's report from the UC Berkeley Labor Center on big bargaining and how to use that to build power.
Yeah, I agree, and I've really enjoyed. I've really gotten a lot from those kind of reports. I think they're, I think that they're really useful, and I think that there's, you mentioned that there's a genuine kind of belief that closed bargaining might get the best results. And on our end, I think there's an ideological belief that open bargaining is better, because I think that we have a that we have a commitment and we have a belief in the importance of and the good of transparency and democratic input and things like that. But there might be some, maybe wizened older, union heads, right, that maybe say that some of that is good to an extent, but too much can be a bad thing. And so they've got this ostensibly belief that they would say comes from reality or something, that a more closed process is going to result in better contracts, and so I think that report really is useful for people that are trying to push for more democracy and more transparency in their unions. And which is as I'm saying this, I want to underscore for the non-union folks in the audiences that unions are still a fundamentally transparent and democratic institutions. Even the least of those are still much more democratic and transparent than any businesses or any workplace without a union. But some are better and more democratic and more transparent than others. And like Adam said, we haven't shied away from that. We have had interviews with the Unite All Workers for Democracy, the Reform Caucus, and the UAW, and we support that, and we support movements for more transparency and democracy in unions that have less of it. But yeah, is there anything that what do you think when you hear people that have kind of that more hard edge or something that they would say comes from reality and practicability about the need for like closed bargaining?
I think a lot of it is really kind of recalibrating an understanding of where our power comes from. And I think that there's become, over the years, a reliance on process, a reliance on the law, a reliance on, how bargaining works in a technical sense, and navigating that through kind of like the very well-trained bargaining team, and that has the expertise, and they know how to, to navigate this process. And so it becomes a question of expertise kind of navigating this very bureaucratic process that I think that if you take a step back, pretty much every unionist is going to admit that process is rigged against us. And so I think that really it's a question of understanding that that process is rigged against us. No matter how well we navigate it, it is going to limit the outcomes that we're able to achieve. And so our best hope is of understanding where our power comes from is from an engaged rank and file, and understanding that realistically, we're going to use the process when the process will help us get what we want, and we're going to bend or break the process when the process doesn't get us what we want. And we need to take a much more flexible, I think, approach to either pushing, I'll leave it for legal reasons, I'll say leaving it at pushing the law in the right direction, to kind of make sure that ultimately the process is only as good as it serves the interests of the workers. And if it's not serving the interests of the workers, then maybe we need to change that process. And so I think it's really just kind of recalibrating an understanding of where does our power ultimately come from? And if we understand that we're just managing, we're managing the decline in the process we have right now, both in bargaining and in union organizing, we're managing decline. And so ultimately what we have to look at is how do we make this process work for us? And the only way to do that is to draw on the only source of power that unions have, which is engaged workers. And so I think that's really like the fundamental, one of the things I recently put to a union local that's been having trouble in bargaining for a number of years against a really, aggressive employer is, and they're opting for a different approach to this contract, is the only way to change the outcomes is to change the approach. And I understand that it's risky, but at the same time, there are some hard limits on what you're ever going to be able to achieve if you keep doing the same thing over and over. Right. And so you're not going to get worse this way. And this is the only way to be able to get something much more transformative. And I know Jane is big on this because it's all about raising expectations for what you can achieve, but also putting some power behind that so you actually can achieve those expectations.
Right, and that's, that ties into one of the things that the boss is going to say against a union is they're going to try to third party it. They're going to try to make it like the union is something separate from you that does or doesn't do things for or to you. And that is a fundamental misunderstanding of what unions are, because unions are the membership. And this is something that even sometimes union representatives can get wrong, and they will third party themselves, and they will see themselves as separate from the workers and as part of an organization that will service the workers. But they're wrong, because their ability to do anything for the workers, quote unquote, where does it come from? Where does management's willingness to give in to even union representatives that see themselves as separate from the workers? Where does that come from? It comes from the workers. It comes from the degree to which management fears worker power. And so, even if there are union stewards or representatives out there that see themselves as a third party, I mean, they're just simply wrong. All of their power comes from their membership, whether they or the membership know it or not. But the boss certainly does. And they don't want you to know it.
Yeah, I think that that's a really important point, that ultimately, even with these kinds of approaches that are a little bit more disconnected from the rank and file, the boss knows where that power comes from, even when we forget it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Connor, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Adam, you had one thing that you wanted to plug before we went off the air.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I think it actually played in the news break, but today is a national march for voting rights. It's the anniversary of Dr. King's March on Washington for voting rights. And Jacob and myself will actually be participating in one here in Alabama, a virtual rally, so that we can make sure the labor movement perspective is included in this discussion on voting rights. So it will be live streamed on YouTube via the People for Democracy channel. And so spaces are filled already for the actual session, but it will be available online. And, send your luck to Jacob and I that we do a good job representing our union brothers and sisters in this conversation.
All right, Adam, thank you. And again, Connor, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the last two times that we've, and there's still a lot that would be good to get to, and maybe we'll even get you on for a third month if you want to, because I think that some good things for people to think about would be like, okay, well, what if negotiations aren't going well? What happens? How do I authorize a strike? Why is a strike good? Because a strike is something that employers are going to say is bad for you and bad for the company, and unions want to make you do it, and that's bad. And of course, unions don't do that. You decide whether or not you want to go on strike. It'd be good to talk about enforcing the contract. You've got a contract. How does the enforcement of that actually happen, and keeping the membership engaged? And so there's still so much just really kind of basic stuff that, and so maybe even if it's not next month, we'll bring you on some other time to talk about that. Make sure that you follow him on Twitter, The House Red. Follow Strikewave on Twitter at Strikewave. Subscribe to their newsletter, thestrikewave.org. You've been listening to the Valley Labor Report. Thank you, and we'll see you next week. Okay. Hello. Okay. Now I can hear. Yeah, we should be off the air now. Okay. And if you want to cut the stream, we'll say goodbye to Connor. Yeah, thanks for coming on, Connor. I appreciate it. Enjoyed it. Is Connor still on?